Greetings and salutations. This is Abdelhadi with The Bitter Truth, where we may not have all the answers, but we're going to have a lot of questions, especially with our guest tonight. You can also visit us at thebittertruth.info. And if you want to listen to the show there, we're also on Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, anything you anywhere you listen to these shows on, we're there as well. If you also want to help the show out, we're also on PayPal and Venmo and doodah. Today, my guest is Professor Bruce Lerro, who's a friend of the show. He's been on before, and he's one of the founders of Planning Beyond Capitalism, which is a phenomenal website. If you have not been there, I'm going to post that link because the article we're going to discuss tonight is a very sentient article, given what's been going on in the economy and everything else. Bruce, how are you, man?
I'm great. Glad to be here, man.
Hey, glad you're here. Yeah. Hey, so listen. Okay, so your essay, "Name Me One Country Where Capitalism Works: A 30-Year Reckoning." I don't think these days you're going to get a whole lot of argument, given that we've seen a lot of failure in this system, right?
Yep. Yeah, I think the thing that is interesting to me is that what I tried to do in the article is not to say that capitalism is messed up and that we should have socialism. The purpose of my article is to say that capitalism doesn't even live up to what it says it does. So I take, somebody like Adam Smith, who in an introduction to economics class, they say, well, he's the father of capitalism, and so we should all follow him. So what I'd like to do is, Abe, I'd like to list 5 qualities that Adam Smith says capitalism will do and deliver, and then we can go through this and just, I think it'll be reasonably self-evident that capitalists today don't deliver on any of these. So the first is that capitalism, according to Adam Smith, capitalism will raise a high standard of living, not just for the elite, but for middle classes and even for working class people. The second major point is that capitalism will produce a decrease in the amount of work done because high technology will make people have more free time. The third one is that capitalism will guarantee opportunities for anyone to start a small business. So in other words, anybody can be a businessman, anybody can turn into a capitalist. The fourth of 5 is that the economic life of capitalism is relatively stable. There's no depressions, panics, recessions. It's pretty much like a self-subsisting system. And then the last one is that capitalism, there would be no wars under capitalism because Smith's invisible hand will benefit all countries and there won't be any need to fight over resources. So there you go.
Well, first of all, 5 of those, that didn't happen.
Right.
We're killing everybody wholesale just to get all their shit for free. I mean, that on just that alone, it wipes out the other 4, right?
Right.
Well, let me ask you something. I mean, so I guess the simple part first. The failure has always been evident, I think, to anybody that's watched, right? I mean, for example, like if you say raise the minimum wage, the first thing that the right wing likes to say is, well, then prices will go up. Well, the minimum wage hasn't gone up since 2009. Prices have gone up. Right. Gas is almost triple what it was 12 years ago. I mean, on and on and on. So where do you think, I mean, because you teach classes, where do you think they get this baked in the brain idea, or people get this baked in the brain idea that capitalism is an immutable thing? It goes from like God to the constitution of capitalism. And if you say we shouldn't be capitalists, or maybe make a high, they act like you're saying stuff about their mother.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of things to say about this. I mean, one thing is, the economic propaganda doesn't begin with taking an economics class in college. it begins with games. Like you remember the Monopoly game?
Sure.
I mean, when I was 7 or 8 years old, people played Monopoly, and it was like a training for thinking about capitalism and thinking about this is how the system works.
Right.
I think one of the things that happens, Abe, is that unfortunately, people in our country really don't track things historically. And so I could easily say that, since 1970, the standard of living in the United States has gone down. And I could say, I could give you lots of examples where the lifestyle of somebody living in 1970 was considerably better, at least for working class people. 1970 for working class people was better than it was than it is today. But people don't look at the last 50 years. They don't look at the history. I mean, I think people are very much preoccupied with the present. And, if you, from teaching classes, the hardest class for me to teach, and I've taught in sociology, I've taught in psychology, the hardest class to teach is history because people don't care. And it's a big fight to get them to say, you should pay attention. This does matter.
Right.
So part of this is Americans not really caring about tracing, that they think that history has nothing to do with right now. So that's at least part of the answer.
Well, and then that's what's so frustrating, though, is because, as you know, history is the lead up to where we are.
Right.
We people wonder why the marginal tax rate was 90% from FDR through Eisenhower. Well, it's because American manufacturing was, I hate to use the word captive, but it was. Right. If you were Ford at the time who owned Opel in Germany, you couldn't sell those as American cars, right? Yeah. They were imports. You had a tariff, right? Right. Then we started letting them, and from 61 on, Kennedy started with a 5% quota that allowed 5% of American manufacturing to be, duty free, sold in America as a domestic product. And that kept going up with both parties, with every president from Kennedy to Clinton, and then we got NAFTA. So history is important, and I know you know that, but that's what's so frustrating to hear you say that you hear this in class. I used to get that crap when I was in school all the time. Yeah.
I would say whenever, even just not to belabor this, but even to say something in, like if I'm teaching a psychology class, and the topics move around a lot, and then I think about something like the Enlightenment or the Romanticism, and I just say to people, so like somebody tell me what went on with Romanticism or the Enlightenment, and people's eyes glaze over. And inevitably, the people that know something about this are not from the United States. And people from other countries, people from other countries know more about the history in this country than many Americans do.
100%.
The other thing I wanted to bring up, Abe, is when you were talking about manufacturing, in Adam Smith's time, he thought that the foundation for capitalism, for making a profit, was manufacturing. And he thought that, research and development, producing infrastructures, building things, that was the foundation for making a profit. But, since the end of World War II, the United States realized that investing in the military was a lot safer than investing in goods and services. And so after World War II, the proportion of capitalist money into the military rose up.
Right.
And then at the same time, not at the same time, maybe a little bit later, the banks and the financial markets, they became the sources of profit. So part of the problem here is that so much of the investments in the United States are not in manufacturing anymore. Right. They're based on the military, which actually destroys productive forces, or finance capitalism, which really doesn't, it's paper made on paper. It's not real production. So that's another thing that would contrast with what Adam Smith thought about capitalism, about what it's supposed to do.
Well, and that's the challenge too. Is I mean, everyone that I talk to now, my age. I mean, I'm 57 years old. I'm not a spring chicken, but I was like a kid in the 70s, and I remember I grew up in a town in South Central that had a lot of factory work. Right, we had General Motors, we had Bethlehem Steel, we had Jerkinson Steel. Yep. Anybody listening to this from Southgate, California, knows exactly what I'm talking about. Firestone Tires had a plant there. Ford had a plant in the next town over. Just in the South Bay, we had Boeing and Hewlett Packard, all these places. Well, up in South Central, a lot of those places closed. Bethlehem Steel and Jerkinson Steel went from 2,000 employees to about 100 each. All they do is expedite shipments from China. Comes from San Pedro up the train on rail, and then they just sort of send it out to whatever construction sites. So they're not even processing steel there anymore. They just get it from overseas. So people always refer to the good old days, which is basically, you mentioned the golden age of from 48 to 70 to about the late 70s in some areas, but still it was like, and so that's a short window in a country of 240 years old.
Right.
And we've had more poor and Gilded Age level disparity than we have had prosperity.
Right. And I think a really interesting thing, a way you can think about this too, is if you think like, okay, so my family was middle class. My father was a commercial artist, and my grandparents came over from Italy at the turn of the century. And in my family in 1970, my father worked 40 hours a week. My mother stayed home. She raised me and my sister. And now, I mean, not even now, but even by 1990, my stepdaughter, we were having a conversation about this, and I tried to show her some things about why history mattered.
Right. And
I said to her, you know what the difference between you being 20 years old and me being 20 years old? When I was your age, I could go to a college if I wanted to, full time, didn't have to work. And then I say, look at you. Now, this is 1990. This is, it's a lot worse now.
Right.
Look at you. You cannot get a place by yourself. You have to live with other people. You have to be a waitress. You have to work at least like a job and a half. Right. And you can only take two colleges, two classes, and you have to go to school a lot longer. Mm-hmm. That's a sign that the standard of living is declined. Is the amount of, like my father works 40 hours a week. Middle class people, there's no such thing as a middle class life with one person working. Two people work, and two people may work more than one job at the same time. So these are really clear indicators of deterioration, and you don't have to be an economist to figure this stuff out.
Well, no, I mean, the math is very simple. I mean, if half of before the pandemic, let's just say before the pandemic, if half of all Americans were making under 30 grand a year,
right,
and $20,000 a year for a family of four is considered poverty, and that 30,000, if it was a 2-income household, it was usually a couple of parents working a couple of jobs a piece,
right?
At 20 hours a piece with no benefits,
right?
Both for minimum wage or maybe a little bit better.
Yeah.
And so whereas when I was a kid in the 60s and 70s, nobody's mom worked. I mean, there was one family on our block whose mom worked. She had a college degree and she didn't want to stay home. And they obviously had more money than a lot of us because they had two incomes. But I mean, shoot, everybody's parent could afford a car. Everybody's parent could afford clothes and food, and mom stayed home, and it was not a big deal. I mean, it's just the economics. I mean, I think minimum wage in the 70s was about $1.75 because I was 16 years old at an ice cream store, making about $2 an hour. Yeah. And I distinctly remember General Motors guys making $9 to $10 an hour.
Right.
Rent back then was like $90 a month. And this is Los Angeles, by the way, right? It's like $90, $100 a month for a 2-bedroom, 1-bath place. Not a summer home, but you could put your family into it. A house was $35,000.
Yeah.
So one family a guy working at Sears could afford to buy a house.
Yes.
And
in terms of, I don't know if you've ever seen this diagram, but there was a really great map that I saw, I don't know, it was a month or so ago, where they talked about a 2-bedroom household and how much money you would have to make per hour to live in a 2-bedroom household, given the cost of rents.
Mhm.
And it was great because in each state, they had the percentage of what you had to make per hour to buy to rent a two-family household.
Mhm.
And the range was really between about $23 an hour and about $30 an hour. So, that's like, there's the math. And if you
Right.
don't make anywhere near that money, then you can make a pretty good argument that, when you talk about homeless people, the stereotypes are they're on drugs, they're taking alcohol, all sorts of psychological problems. Some of that might be true, but look at the situation of a person that's even making $13 an hour.
Sure.
That cannot afford a two-family apartment. And so, of course, this is the reason a lot of people are homeless, is because they don't make enough money to pay the rent on a monthly basis.
Well, see, and to your point on that, I've had there's a gentleman I've had on the show a few times who works with a few nonprofits in San Francisco, and he works with like 5 of them, and Raul.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so he's been on the show like 4 or 5 times, and one of the first times he came on, he made this. To me, I didn't know this. 40% of people that are homeless, they do have jobs. They're not insane or have a drug problem. They have jobs.
Yes.
They have enough. They're together enough to get a Motel 6 or to live in their car and get a gym membership and shower. And his day job, is helping those people transition out of those situations into housing again, like whatever run of bad luck they had.
Yes.
But if you got 40% of homeless people that have jobs,
right,
then there's a problem. And when people, if someone worked 50 hours a week making, there's not a county in the United States, and this includes West Virginia, which is saying something. There's not a county in the United States where a 40-hour minimum wage job is going to help you pay rent.
Right.
Not a
Right.
county, not one,
Right.
and for not even for a 1-bedroom.
Yeah. And I had just to, say something about my profession, which was being an adjunct teacher. There was an article, probably it was about a year ago, where I think it was the San Jose Mercury News did an interview with an adjunct college teacher that was teaching 4 classes a week, which is what I used to do. And she was living in her car because she could not afford the rent. This is a college teacher. And there's a picture of her in her car grading papers. And she talked about how she's got her bedroll in the back and she knows the places she needs to go where the cops will leave her alone. I mean, this is a college teacher, right? I mean, this is,
Well, you look at the industrialized world. I mean, the minimum wage, for example, in Denmark is $22 an hour.
Uh-huh.
And the conservative argument is always, well, if you want to pay $30 for a Big Mac, a Big Mac is 27 cents more in Denmark than it is here on average.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so that $22 minimum wage. Oh, and they also get a year of maternity leave.
Yeah.
They get a pension, and they get something like 2 months vacation.
Yep.
Okay, in addition to sick days and everything else.
Right.
Now, what's frustrating is we seem to have this. To me, when people go, oh, they'll go out of business. Well, I'm in business. I'm majored in business. It's my wheelhouse. I just, you want to talk about employee benefits. You want to talk about healthcare. You want to that's I know that stuff. Mm-hmm. So my reaction to that is there's things we could do governmentally. Like if we cut defense by say 2/3,
right,
put $300 billion into the Department of Defense.
Right.
The bar down the street could afford a $25 minimum wage because guess what? He's getting a subsidy from the government, from the Department of Labor, or a massive tax break. Right. Or wipe out of his property tax, whatever. Right. Anybody under 100 lives, you can measure it out. Mm-hmm. We did that bullshit with the ACA. Right. Mm-hmm. Any companies under 50 people did not have to buy insurance for their employees. Mm-hmm. Right. And then there's assholes like Walmart who got around it by not employing anybody longer than 40 hours. But point is that it can be done. So all that to say that when people tell me this about the minimum wage, I'm like, well, we haven't raised the minimum wage. In 1987, it was $7.09. It is now $7.25. Took 20 years to make it go 16 cents.
Yeah.
So that is functionally a lie.
Yeah. Now I just want to connect this up a little bit to what I was saying about history in America. Please. Because another problem is people in this country don't know about what goes on in European countries, so they don't have a sense of comparison, right? So I mean, some of the European countries, they're still capitalist countries, France, Germany, let's just say France, Germany, Scandinavian countries, of course.
Even Britain still with Boris Johnson is still.
So I think in those countries, I think one of the differences is in those countries, in European countries, there are socialist parties in there, and the socialist parties and the unions are stronger. So even though they're capitalist countries, there's a kind of respect for having an infrastructure and having higher wages and doing things differently. And if Americans knew about that, like there's a wonderful book called Introduction to Political Economy, which is written, I forget who the writers are, but they're from an organization called Dollars and Cents.
Okay.
And they really compare they have one great chapter where they compare the United States to Sweden. And you see this table. Life in the United States, life in Sweden. And it is, it's remarkable how different it is and how much better it is in Sweden. But at the same time, I think we have to look at, capitalism as a global system. And, unfortunately, the Scandinavian countries, even like Sweden, I think was the most left, where they had this social democratic Labor Party.
Sure.
They carried out the most extensive social democratic program that I'm aware of.
Sure.
And even they, over the last 40 or 50 years, they have gone down because we're dealing with a global capitalist system. The United States is like just one of the worst examples, but many countries in Europe are now underwater as well because this neoliberal program in the last 50 years has hit the European countries as well. So, but they're still at least a couple of the countries are still in relatively better shape. And if the people in the United States knew about it, they would actually, best of all possible worlds, they would begin to put pressure on the government to say, look how they do it over here.
Sure.
Why can't we do some of that? Why can't we learn from people?
See, but to your point, though, those people in those countries that you just named, most of them do not romanticize their parties. For example, here, Democrats tell me shit all the time. Like, well, the Democratic Party represents my values. Great. Well, they don't vote your values, you fucking dipstick. So for instance, they always go to FDR, right? Yeah. Well, it wasn't FDR who acted in this grandfatherly fashion. He was pushed by two socialist parties, a communist party, and labor.
Right.
Who were like, listen, and by the way, the Bolshevik Revolution was only 15 years before. Mm-hmm. Now, you and I remember 15 years ago. I remember exactly what I was doing in 2006. I remember around this time too. So did FDR. And Russia had a 400-year-old monarchy go right up at the poop chute. Right. And so when he was challenged, it's like, you better do this. Hoover fucked up and he's out. You don't do this, you will be out. We will make sure you do not get reelected. Yeah. And so he engaged these programs.
Yes.
And it was at the expense of his capitalist buddies, and not even a great expense. It was like, I think the average was like not even 0.8 of a percentage point in tax increase, to the capitalist class. But even then, that pissed them off because they have this derisive attitude toward workers. And I'm a man of a certain age. I mean, it's when I talk to people under 40, it blows my mind how nobody teaches about the Pullman strikes anymore. Mm-hmm. Because when I was in school and I almost flunked out of college 3 times, I was on academic probation 3 times. So it's not like I'm some Rhodes Scholar.
Yeah.
But the Pullman strikes, I remember. And when I talk about this with anyone under 40, it's like as Bill Hicks used to say, it's like I'm doing card tricks in front of a dog.
Yes.
And so here we have the countries you named, I don't think have this big romanticism about, oh no, I belong to the German Socialist Christian Party. They're super duper. We're the bestest party. And my friend and my representative tweeted, my MP tweeted, and I believe their tweet. I mean, so why do you think we have this just profound? I mean, I'm not going to say that we're the stupidest country on earth, but we have this junk culture, junk politics. As Chris Hedges says, the media has become courtesans to the king, where all they give a shit about is whether or not the president teabagged a stripper and if her lawyer's going to run for president. Nobody gives a crap that we got ships in the South China Sea right now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. I mean, one thing is a number of the countries in Europe have more than two parties, and so like there's a continuum of that. You're for your party has pros and cons, but you vote for them, and you actually see some things getting done that you voted for.
Right.
Here, you've got what's good about the Republican Party is that it's clear. They're wealthy. They want to keep their wealth. They're racist. They're sexist. Okay. So
they tell you who they are. They tell you who they are.
Yeah. That's exactly right. So, Malcolm X years ago, he had this thing about the foxes and the wolves.
Yes.
Right. So he says, okay, the Republicans are the wolves. It's like a pitcher, a relief pitcher that's got like one pitch. It's a fastball. It's coming, and what you're up against. With the Democrats, they do more or less the same thing, but they also have an ideology that they're the party of change.
Right.
And and the idea that you can have, let's say, we've got like maybe seven, I would say we've got about 7 social classes in this country. How is it possible, according to the ideology, the Republicans represent sort of the ruling class or the upper class, and then the Democratic Party is supposed to represent everybody else. So in other words, upper middle class, working class, poor. One party could never do that.
Right.
Right. And yet people, I think this is one of the biggest political blocks, maybe the biggest political block, is that they're not willing to face that the Democratic Party is a ruling class party.
Right.
We have one party, the Republican Democratic Party. Right. That's it. And I'm always amazed at the extent to which people fall all over themselves to say the Democratic Party is different from the Republican Party,
right?
As if it were not a capitalist party,
right?
And that somehow they're sort of, when they don't do things that you want, they're seen as like bumblers or incompetents or
But
design. They don't even know this is a ruling class party.
It's by design. Yeah, they're not feckless idiots. It's by design.
Right. So, there's so many things that I think now is getting harder and harder to accept, because I think the Democratic Party, it's harder and harder for Americans to face that. No, it's not harder and harder. I think it's easier to see that the Democratic Party is not going to deliver the goods. And that's a tremendous illusion that I hope will be broken. I mean, Abe, I used to think that when I would think about an order in which people could give up their political illusions, I always thought the first thing they would do would be that they would feel like the Democratic Party really doesn't represent most people.
Right.
And I thought the resistance would come from telling somebody that capitalism doesn't work or that socialism is good. But what's actually happened that I've seen is that people are more open to criticizing capitalism. They're more open to socialism, at least people under 30. But the biggest illusion that I've found is that the Democratic Party is not a ruling class party, that there's something else. And I went on, to just give you an example of this. I went on a Facebook page of a group called Atheopagans, and they're a good group. And it was on the inaugural day, and I watched their posts, and I saw what they were saying about Biden, and oh, thank goodness we have Biden, etc. And I got in there and I said, I'm glad Trump is gone, but the Democratic Party is a ruling class party. It's not going to do anything it's going to do some things better, but most things worse than the Republicans. Well, I got 250 comments to this.
Wow.
Really hostile comments.
Oh, well, I'll bet.
And so this is like, I think the main thing, Abe, is that many of the people who are liberals are really FDR liberals. If you try to track down their ideology, and they have the illusion that the Democratic Party is like a left liberal party.
They operate under the illusion that Bill Clinton was an FDR liberal.
Right. And they don't understand the Democratic Party has been sliding to the right since Carter. It's been sliding to the right further. So it's like a center-right party.
Right.
And they're imagining this party is like a left liberal party.
Right.
And it's a complete disconnect.
Well, if anything, the Democratic Party has been masters for 200 years of remaking their image.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, they just, when the Republicans started off as an anti-slavery party.
Right.
Formed out of a bunch of, pissed off Democrats and Whigs. Okay.
Right.
And then by in 1960, almost overnight, and this was Nixon's fault, they remade themselves as the party of the NAACP. Yeah. When the Republicans actually had a better relationship with the NAACP. And if Nixon didn't fuck up and flinch when they had Martin Luther King put in a state prison for sitting at a lunch counter, and Bobby Kennedy's people, even Bobby Kennedy was pissed about this. I've read several biographies on him. He wasn't a big champion of this stuff until his brother got killed. It was almost like, Shakespeare. But in 1960, I mean, and he's also the one who had Martin Luther King surveilled when he became top cop in 1961. So, but people forget that this was not, and then overnight by 64, within 4 years, they had transformed themselves as to the party of the people of color. Barry Goldwater was this insane man.
Right.
He was the Trump of his day,
right.
A little smarter, but the Trump of his day. And Johnson running against that. And Johnson also ran on a lie. He said he was against the war, and and then he traded in the political capital that he gained from the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act and squandered it in Vietnam. So it just showed you what a right-wing bunch of fuckers these people were.
Well, I think also this is connected up to identity politics, because you identified what you were saying about, the party of the NAACP. Well, now we've got a bunch of people in Biden's
cabinet,
cabinet that are, different colors, and this is like thinking that what you really want to have here is diversity of capitalism. It's like identity politics is like saying that you can have a variety of people in power, and somehow that's going to make things better. Capitalism can accommodate any stratification system, not class stratification, but any race stratification, sexual stratification. They'd be thrilled to have people in there that fulfill those things, and they will turn into they'll run the same capitalist program as anybody else will.
Plus, another thing that the so-called liberal doesn't like to talk about either. They whitewash Martin Luther King, and they love to leave out the part where he said, Kamala Harris, jailed 100,000 Californians, like more than half of them for bullshit drug offenses. But they love this, give them the I have a dream speech, but they love to leave out the part where he said, without social and economic justice, you can't have racial justice.
Yeah.
They love to leave that part out. Right. And this was like the last, few years of his life where he had like a 75% disapproval rating.
Yeah.
Right. So but you're right, though. It's a part. And by design, this is not an accident, especially when Clinton and Gore in 88, 89, did the whole DLC thing. They showed Wall Street they were open for business. And they delivered. They delivered NAFTA. They delivered all these things that the Bush and Reagan couldn't deliver.
Yeah. I mean, I think another thing is that people, it just is more history kind of stuff. Most people don't realize that we had socialist and communist parties in this country in the early, Debs ran as a socialist party in 2010, not 2010, 1912, something like that. And
1912, actually 1916 and 1920.
Yeah.
In 1920, he ran from jail.
Right. So, I mean, there is a history in this country of opposition, but if you don't teach it in the classrooms.
Right.
And, not so much college teaching, but I know that like grammar school teaching and high school teaching, conservatives really have control over the textbooks in this country.
Sure.
And so that stuff is not going to be shown. And so people forget. And then when they get to college, they might get a single class where there's like a history class and there's something about Marx, and they take a sociology class, and they say to themselves, why didn't I find out about this? Why am I finding out about this now?
Right.
It's because you spent 12 years, grammar school, high school, learning nothing about it. So, I have to say, I don't care, I don't care for Bernie Sanders. I don't think he's a real socialist. Most socialists don't think he's a socialist, but I'm very happy that he made the word socialism circulatable now. So at least the word is in circulation now, and it's not like a taboo word that you can't use anymore.
See, and then to your point though, when you're talking about kids, so I think you and I agree on Bernie Sanders. It is what it is. But I think with kids or people, and the numbers are staggering. The amount of people who don't read after high school and don't read after college, like at all. Yeah. And so, like for example, about a couple weeks back during the playoffs, I saw, I don't know if you follow football, but Matt Stafford, for the Detroit Lions got traded to the Rams. Right?
I had no idea.
Yeah, he got a way better deal, and Detroit is sort of like he is to Detroit what San Diego was to Phillip Rivers. Okay, they don't want, they got this great guy, they don't want to spend the money, but they want to pay him $1 billion to stay because he keeps the fans hopeful. Right? We got a great quarterback. We had no line, but we got a great quarterback. But long story short, when I saw that trade go down, I saw such anger and a flurry of reposts and ESPN.com posts and just, whatever. And I'm like, 2 days before, fucking Biden just in one day steamed more troops into Syria and doubled down on Venezuela using the $30 million that Trump afforded for another coup, right, in the last CARES Act. So Biden is going to use Trump appropriated money to coup Venezuela again, recognizing that twerp Juan Guaido again, right, as interim president. Does that mean the Buffalo Bills are the interim AFC champs? And they're going to play the interim NFC champs, the Green Bay Packers, and they're going to have their own separate fucking Super Bowl? I mean, this is the level of stupidity. Yeah. When you talk about and people, it's interim, it's like, or when they cooed Bolivia. I had friends in Austin. I live in chewy blue Austin, not crunchy red Dallas, chewy blue Austin. And these people with a straight face are going, but Morales was there for a long time. 14 years is a long time to run something. I go, well, he won elections. I mean, Angela Merkel ran Germany for 15 years. I don't see us cooing them. And then their eyes completely glaze over because they got their shit from the fucking news and they don't read anything. I mean, God Christ. My friend was talking about something. One of my business associates was talking about something from 20 years ago. And he goes, and nobody remembers that. I said, 20 years ago? Jesus Christ, nobody remembers 20 minutes ago.
Yeah.
You're talking about
when we moved recently from Oakland up to here in Olympia, when we had to sell the first house we were at here, and I had in my living room, I had a wall-to-wall library of books and shelves and stuff like that. So I packed up my books to leave, and I thought that the shelving in the living room for books would be like a good selling point. They were
built-ins. They were built-ins?
Yes.
Wow.
They were not built-ins. I had them constructed, but they were not, they didn't come with us.
Yeah.
The real estate agent said to me, these have to come down.
What?
And I said, why? And he said, people don't read anymore. So I had to take down the bookshelves because the real estate agent said, it's not a selling point, it's a liability. So that gives you some, and this, Abe, this is not poor people. This is not working class people.
Right.
This house was like a middle class house.
Right.
And so the implication is middle class people don't read anymore either.
Right. Well, and also too, I mean, like I went on a little rant earlier about junk culture and junk politics and all that shit. And I hate to sound like an elitist asshole, but I am. So there you go. But I mean, I remember about 20 years ago, I was working in the film business, and I got a reputation, quote unquote, as being an intellectual. And you want to know what deemed me so? Because I liked old movies like Citizen Kane and Sunset Boulevard. It's like, oh, he's one of those guys. He's like a cinema guy. I'm like, okay, you're working in the film business. I would hope that you're a cinema guy too, unless you're a, let's make shitty films again guy, which, at that time I wasn't. I still don't believe in it, but it's just like that's what made me so angry is it's just so easy to dumb down this shit. And it's by design. It's by design. I mean, these people that react to your bookshelves, they were programmed that way.
Yep.
Right. And even now there's no excuse. I mean, Christ, you got stuff on Audible and all this. There's no reason to not get more information other than what the mainstream media is telling you, or, why you can't read a history book or why you can't read a biography. You can do it while you can listen to it while you're working out.
Yeah.
If you're not a reading learner, you're more audio or whatever. I don't know.
Yeah. When I was teaching, one of the things I felt like I really gave to students, and students really said this to me at the end of the class, is that they knew things were bad, and they knew it from their jobs, from their households, and the chaos that goes on in the house and at work, but they didn't have a framework for putting the pieces together. And the great thing about teaching a class is that when you got students for 18 weeks, you can really build a system. And I would show them like how these things are all connected. And what Americans really need is an analytical framework to put in all this stuff so they can think about things in a systematic way. Mm-hmm. And, college is like one place where you get to do it. But then the problem is, and I know when people would leave the class, sometimes they'd come back, a couple of years later, and they say, one of the things I really miss is having a place to go to talk about social issues in a systematic way with other people. Right. Because it's very hard. We don't have a culture where people can go and discuss things in a forum that is clearly an ongoing thing people can come back to and talk about. People don't really have that. I mean, I think, Facebook has its good points, but I also think that face-to-face stuff is really missing and lacking.
We got a few minutes left. I mean, and face-to-face stuff, and even so, I think too much face-to-face stuff lately, at least the last 5 years, has been completely informed by online behavior. Right. Because and I've been saying this a lot more than I used to. I don't say this to women, but I say this a lot to men. It's clear you have not been punched as a child, have you? Uh-huh. You weren't hit when you were a kid, were you? No, you didn't. You didn't get punched by another fifth grader, did you? Because you don't know boundaries, right? Like you don't know boundaries, and the things that people say to your face because they're so used to being from behind a keyboard. And, and I have temper issues, but so it's easy for me to physically threaten people, but it's like, I get really angry because I'm like, wow, I was talking about this. I didn't insult you. I didn't go out of my way to call you a name. I just said this, like you said about Biden on that pagan post, and you got all this hostile response. Yeah. Right. It's like, you didn't say anything like offensive. You just said, hey, glad Trump's out, but and by the way, nobody seems to give a shit what we're going to be doing as long as the guy is blue. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's that whole thing again. And to your point, Facebook has its merits, but but also too, it depends on the level of respect. And no matter how neutral I always try to start off online, it invariably somebody jumps in and has to start with whatever. And I'm finding that people do this in person all the time. The joke I used to always make is when road rage was happening about 20 years ago, 25 years ago, when road rage became a thing. Yeah. I was like, well, gee whiz, I don't behave that way at the grocery store. If I almost hit a woman's shopping cart, we don't curse at each other and flip each other off. We just kind of nod and go, hey, sorry, and move on to the produce aisle. Right. Right. and now it's just like, it's just this conditioning of this desensitization. I can't even talk today. It desensitizes the conditioning of human to human interaction. And in the last year or so now, there's all this COVID crap. People are so separate in public and they don't even acknowledge each other anymore. They got masks on and stuff. And, You know,
Yes.
it's a weird time. And I think it's because, and you know better than I do. And this is a cliche. It's not an original thought, but the older I get, the last 10, 15 years, I'm seeing more and more that we're becoming Rome.
Yeah.
You know, if the first 44 guys were Constantine the First, Trump was Commodus. And now we're on our way to the next 9 guys. You know, you're going to see the day of you're going to see like the 30-day Pope. You're going to see the 30-day president.
You know, I think back to capitalism for a minute. I think it's really important to realize that, you know, many economists, not just Marxian economists, have said there's all sorts of problems with capitalism now around debt, not just, you know, differences between social classes, but debt, the financialization of everything. One of the things capitalists want to do is to make all their problems due to COVID, and that somehow COVID is causing, you know, the instability of the markets and things like that. And I think we have to keep in mind that, like, capitalism has deep economic problems before COVID, and even when it comes back, it's still the problems are going to be worse because so many people are out of work, because I think it's something like 70% of small businesses has collapsed.
Permanently closed.
Yeah. So this is not something that is going to go away when we get back to face. It's still going to be a major problem. It's still going to be a deep problem in both contradictions.
And to your point, though, before COVID, to your point, you know, we were bailing out capitalism every 4 to 7 years on the regular.
That's right.
You know, it's for at least 100 years, especially since the formation of the Federal Reserve, we've been bailing out capitalism all the time.
Right.
And if COVID showed us anything, is that we've been lied to. Right? You can work from home in most cases. Right.
Yes.
There is money, not for you, but there is money. $1 trillion a day to the banks.
Yeah.
You know, $90 billion of the fucking airlines.
Yeah.
You know, because they spend all their capital. You know, this is a joke that I like to tell capitalists. It's not an original joke, but it's fun when they go, well, we need money to. Well, you should have set aside 3 months of expenses. That's what they tell the poor people. You know, you shouldn't have gone to Starbucks and got that toast point and that latte. You know, you should have saved your money better. Well, fuck you, Chase Bank, Disney Cruise Lines, who are farmed in Bahamas and Jamaica and everything else. You should have put away 3 months worth of savings like everybody else you expect to do.
You know, this is another one of these. I think it's called in psychology. It's like called cognitive compartmentalization, which is working class people usually say, okay, well, if you go into debt, you got to pay your debts back, and you can't start up a small business till you pay your debts back.
Right.
Well, here we have a financial system that's so unstable that the banks have to print free money to keep the whole thing floating.
Right.
Isn't that like a problem? I mean, can't you, can you imagine if you had debt that you simply printed money and gave it to your debtors? I mean, it's like there's so many contradictions between what people normally think is a normal way of life for an individual, and then the economic system does the exact opposite of what they spend their whole life thinking morally was right, and it's happening right in front of their faces. And you would think that they would see, wait a minute, like, how can we have a good economy when we have a central banking system which has to print money to keep the whole thing floating? Like, isn't that a problem?
Right. Yeah. And on that note, we're gonna have to end it pretty soon here. But yeah, you're 100% correct. And it's frustrating to watch because both sides do it. Right. Both sides, and what they don't realize is this is not a right or left thing. This is a bottom to the top thing.
Right.
And people have to start getting more solidarity with their class. I don't know who I heard say this about a month or two ago, is that if you make $1 million a year, you're $960,000 away from being homeless, and you're $999 million away from being a billionaire. So you might want to side with the working class, because if you're making under a couple $100,000 a year, you're still working class. Right. All you need is a bad summer, a coke habit, and a couple of hookers, and your life is over. Okay. So it's just, you're not immutable. You're not, you're not, I can't even talk today. You're not indestructible.
Right.
So it just, but anyway, but listen, folks, my guest has been Bruce Lerro. Again, thank you so much for your time. Always a pleasure having you on, man. You're just a wealth of knowledge.
It's always fun to talk to you, Abe.
I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
No problem. And guys, again, you could visit thebittertruth.info and get some fabulous swag like t-shirts and whatnot to make your life better. We are also on Venmo and PayPal if you don't like the Patreon subscription model, which we're also on, and any support is appreciated. And as always, if this stuff makes you uncomfortable, it's supposed to. Sleep tight.